All right, so I just finished it. I got it yesterday. It released yesterday, and I finished it yesterday. The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. As you know, I did a vlog, which was probably really awkward and not very great, but whatever. It was a vlog reading the entire series before Queen of Nothing. And when I say entire, basically it was 2 other books and a short story. Well, Queen of Nothing was excellent. That's all I have to say. We basically pick up with Jude being stuck out in the human world. She's very upset. She feels betrayed by her sister, her adopted father, her love, Mr. Carden, and she just doesn't know how to process it, how to go on in life. And so she's stuck. She's like, I can't go back to the fairy world. I'm stuck here in this world. I don't like this world, and I feel so betrayed. Well, she goes back and forth on like how she can get back into this world. She says, maybe I could figure out a way to use Carden's words against them to get back. Maybe I could just, like, it says that it needs to be a royal parting. Well, I'm queen, so maybe I can I can let myself be pardoned. But she's like, no, that won't work, because no one in the fairy world is going to believe me for being the queen. And so she's just upset about it, right? So she goes on with her life, and she's trying to make money to help out with the bills because she's living with Vivian Oak. And so she goes and works for a fairy who lives in the regular world and does things for fairy folk that live in the regular world. And one of the things is there's this fairy who is basically killing and eating folk in the real world. And so they offer her money to go, Jude money, to go and basically convince this fairy to promise to never eat another person in the real world again. So she goes to the house, and as she's going there, she finds out that this person is somebody that her father, her adopted father, had talked about a lot growing up. So she goes there. The lady's like, I'm not going to give you a promise. Who do you think you are? And then they fight, honorably, basically, and sort of unhonorably. They fight, and Jude does win in the end. So the woman promises that she will not eat anyone else. And then she says to Jude that she should come back and fight her often, because she thinks that Jude has something in her that's very much like her. Now, if we recall, at the beginning of the Folk of the Air, Jude did have this, like, spitfire and grit that was conniving and scheming and strong and all of this. And then she kind of lost herself a little bit. And I don't think it was bad character development. I think that Holly Black wanted her to lose herself. Like, she didn't quite know how to hold on to power, how to deal with all the different emotions that come with being in power, and not just that, but in a family situation that is volatile. Being in love with someone that you don't feel could love you back. Like, handling all those emotions. And she didn't know how to, and so she was a little lost, like, emotionally. But at this point, she's upset. She feels betrayed. She all of a sudden has this strength and this anger and this, like, desire inside of her to just, like, rip everyone's heads off, basically. So this character, which I'm not gonna tell you who it is, basically says, come back and fight me and we'll talk again. And it was basically just like a friendly, like, let's spar. So she's like, sure, okay, she'll go. But when she gets back to the house where Vivi is, Tyrion's there. And if we remember, at the very end of the last book, there was a betrayal. And so immediately Jude's like, out of my house, out, get out. And everyone's like, come on, slow down, this is Vivi's house to begin with. And she's like, fine, then I'll leave. And she leaves. But Tyrion comes running after her. Basically, we find out that Tyrion is pregnant, and she has murdered her husband. Spoiler. Oh, I should have said spoiler first, right? Anyways, she murdered her husband. And she needs Jude to go back to Fairy World and basically pretend that she's Tyrion to go to murder trial so that she could not be glamored, not have enchantments, and she could lie and say that she didn't do it. So basically, after a long spiel, Jude decides she's going to do it. So she decides to go back to Fairy World. She goes back to Fairy World, pretends that she is Tyrion, and is about to go into the king's court, and basically the court is like, you murdered him! If it wasn't you, it was Jude! And everyone's like, oh no, we need to check her, make sure she doesn't have any glamours or protect talismans on her. So they're like, strip her, and she's like, I just lost my husband, and you want to strip me in front of and give all my dignity away? And so the prince, the whole time, is smirking and like, yeah, no something. It's like, fine, we won't do that to you, but instead you'll come to my chambers and I'll check you myself, right? And so in Jude's mind, she's like, he wants to be with my sister, like, because she looks like me, or maybe he just wants to be a pervert or something, and she's just mad at him. When she gets to on the way she's there, she's trying to plan an escape, how to get out of here, and she's also runs into this servant who passes word that her father is on his way to get her. Well, to get Tyrion, right? So she's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. When she gets into the king's chamber, he shuts the door and he's like, did you get my messages? Did you get my letters? Like, and she's like, what are you talking about? She's just mad at him, just completely, absolutely mad. And he's like, I know you're Jude. I knew it from the moment you stepped in here. You're Jude, and you've come back, and I am, glad that you're here and all this stuff. And basically, she doesn't believe him, and he realizes that she doesn't, know anything. And so there's all this miscommunication and stuff, but before they could solve it, Murdoch comes in, the adopted father of Jude, and rescues Tyrion from everybody's clutches. And Jude's like, don't let me go, and she's trying to get away, but Murdoch uses, basically chloroformish type thing and knocks her out, right? And takes her away. And takes her back to camp, and she has to try to pretend that she's Jude in camp with Murdoch and his wife, who know her very well, and try to get away. And she's caught up in this scheme, trying to figure it all out. Anyways, needless to say, and I say needless to say a lot, while she's in camp, she finds out some information about Murdoch and his plan to take over the kingdom and who he has as a prisoner. And then one night, as she's about ready to try to escape, someone comes to her tent and tries to not smuggle her, but cover her mouth and everything, and she freaks out. Lo and behold, it is the Court of Shadows, including Prince Carden, who has donned the spy life and come to get her. So all this stuff happens. I'm not going to tell you it all because it's spoiling it for you, but so the land has chosen Jude as its high queen. And when everyone gets back to the castle and everything is figured out and it's revealed that Carden is married to Jude and everyone knows the situation, that's when the curse comes into play. And Carden makes a choice that changes everything, and then Jude is left to basically try to pick up the pieces and fix the situation. But right before this curse happens, it's revealed that Carden, though he feels he doesn't have, his heart is all messed up, he reveals that his heart only belongs to Jude and will only ever belong to Jude. And before Jude can tell him how she feels, that's when the curse happens and all of this must be broken. So she's not only struggling with figuring out how to break the curse, be the High Queen, and save her love, but she has to deal with like the feelings inside of like, maybe it's too late, maybe I've already lost him, all that stuff, the guilt that comes with it. So I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but it was a very satisfying end. I cannot tell you, I was not expecting what happened. Like, I had theorized all these ideas, and I had listened to quite a few booktubers who had been talking about the Folk of the Air series, and I had been hearing all of their theories and like just really trying to come to grasp with it all, and I was not expecting the way that it turned out. However, it was very satisfying the way it turned out. So that's all I'm going to say about the actual plot itself. The pacing in the story never like stopped. It continued to captivate me. There was really no boring part. And I was worried, like I think a lot of other people were, how long she was going to be inside the mortal world and if that was going to drag on. Well, it didn't. It was actually pretty fast that she ended up back in the fairy world, and before she even made it back into the fairy world, there was a lot going on in the mortal world that kind of ties in later on into the story, which is really intriguing. And the pacing just continued to flow and flow and flow, and I never felt the need to put the book down. I never felt the need to skip ahead. I never felt the need to like glance over certain sections. It was just really all very good, very well paced, very intense, and very intriguing. The lore in the book is right on point. It follows along the entire Folk of the Air series, as well as some of the other fairy series that Holly Black has done. She kind of tied in a lot of different characters, a lot of different storylines into this, which I thought was very strong. The characters themselves, everyone held their characters really well. As a full series, there are characters I didn't like, and there are characters that I did like. And some of them, it was I loved to hate them or hated to love them. And then there were some that just I didn't like at all, just because I didn't feel like they were strong enough. They were just very like one-dimensional characters. I think Tyrion would have been one of those one-dimensional characters had it not been for The Lost Sister, which is a short story that Holly Black wrote to go between Cruel Prince and Wicked King. I would have really thought that she was a very one-dimensional character, but as book 3 came into play and Queen of Nothing came in, then I saw a dynamic change inside of Tyrion as a character, and I feel like I wish I had seen more of it. But then again, she really wasn't a primary character in the story. She could almost have her own series, honestly, because all the things that are going on in her heart and her mind as she progresses could definitely make like a very interesting series herself, especially what comes next, because she's essentially in the same position that her mother was, which is pregnant in fairy world. She was married to a fairy, but she killed her husband, and now she is set to take over his lands and his titles and all that jazz. And then we think to ourselves, well, what comes next? What does she do? She's never going to be the same person. She's definitely changed a lot, but how and where's her heart? And then we see the ghost enter the picture, and we question, how is he going to play a role in this whole story? So she could have her own little storyline as well. But in regards to the other characters, Cardan was definitely one of those characters that switched from like I loved to hate him at first, and then I hated loving him because he just like, I was nervous that he was like going to really screw up everything. And I kept having like, okay, so Leigh Bardugo's books, the Grishaverse series. The Darkling, I was one of those characters where I really, really, really like loved to hate him and then hated loving him, all that stuff. And then he totally screwed me over at the end. So I was really worried about Prince Carden. I'm like, no, don't. Like, do I want to invest in that character, the emotions that I feel from Jude's perspective, right, into this character? And I'm glad I did. Like, he really was a well-written character. He was conniving and interesting and basically very similar to Jude herself, but in completely different way. Like where um Jude is always worried she's going to fall too far into the darkness, even though she really kind of is in the darkness. And Prince Carden is like worried that the lightness is going to show through. Like he wants to be dark, but at the same time there is like this dimension inside of him that is super not that, especially when he talks about I am not a murderer. And he continues to like show and reveal things that you wouldn't think a person who was so dark and conniving and devious and wicked would be. So I think it was very interesting to like compare the two, Jude and Carden, and see that. Someone had mentioned in a comment somewhere, I'm not sure, I was reading a bunch about the Queen of Nothing, and someone had mentioned at some point that they thought that Carden and Murdoch were very similar characters with just very different outcomes. But I don't think so at all. Honestly, Murdoch's character is so different than Carden, and even though they were both like born into like tension. For example, Murdoch was born on the battlefield, right? And his mother and his father, they're all warriors, and it's all driven into him like, you do not lose, you're a winner. You fight till you win. And Carden is opposite. He was born into like a house without love. And so he was deprived of love. But even though he was deprived of love, there was still like an innocence and a kindness in him that was different than what other people saw, because they only saw the darkness of him. And that's because he only wanted them to see the darkness because he thought that's all that he was worth. But at the same time, there is morals in him. He has a code of conduct, a code of morals that he follows. And even though he doesn't allow people to see it because he's really guarded himself a lot, like, it is really interesting to see those peeking through. And then to see how a fairy really can love, like, we know that Murdoch loves his girls. Like, he really does. But it's a different kind of love, and it's like, but he still loves them. And we see how Locke loved Tyrion, and so we question if it's even a possibility, a capability. But then we see some other characters that are in some of the other books that Holly Black has written that shows there is more depth and connection and capability and intimacy for love that fairies can have. So we're questioning, like, can Carden really feel the way we want him to feel towards Jude? And we kind of see this like awkward, like schoolboyish, like, I sent you notes, like, don't you know how I feel? Don't you see it? Attitude from him, and we're reminded of his age. Well, technically he's a lot older than he is, but we're reminded that he's still young in his like fairy life, and we're reminded that he's never had love shown to him and the opportunity to see it. So it's kind of interesting to see like how he learns to open up and how he learns to show his love. And I honestly think he was much better at it than Jude was. Like, Jude was so confused, like, by the hatred and betrayal and like love, and like she was just so confused, where Carden, he pretty much knew, like, from the beginning, like, I hate the fact that I'm falling in love with this woman, like, and it's not an infatuation, and it's very much like this developed like love that he's starting to feel for her. And so it's very interesting. So characters were done really well. They were very dynamic. All of them, I think, were pretty dynamic. All the main ones, at least. The pacing was great. The setting was wonderful. The folklore was just superb. Like, all the lore that she weaved through from the Folk of the Air and then from her other series and from traditional, like, fairy tales and whatnot. It's just so well done. The entire series as a whole is hard to explain because the world is so intricate and different and detailed and rich. So it's easy to get lost in it. And though I would not say, like, Cruel Prince was, like, exceptional writing, the story was just wonderful. And then Wicked King, just, you were so entranced by the story and the world building and the characters that you don't even see the craft as much. And that's a talent, I've got to say, for a writer, is when you distract the audience so much that they don't see the craft. And then Queen of Nothing was just, it, like, hit the spot. So this story, even though I did not guess anything right, I thought Jude was going to be the one that was pregnant. I thought they were going to break the curse by something else and all this stuff. And it was just wonderful to see the way that she did it. It was surprising. It was just satisfying. And all the characters, including the smaller characters, were, like, interweaved and their stories came to an end. But that's, like, my sporadic, like, review of the Queen of Nothing and basically the Folk of the Air series. I really enjoyed it. It was just fantastic. So if you haven't read it already, read the Folk of the Air. Queen of Nothing just came out last night. It was great. So with that being said, if you have any comments, leave them below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much. Bye.